I'm Jack Kennedy, and they hit a lot harder in my opinion too.
What is up, everybody? My name is Keelan McNamara, and everyone's got a plan until they get hit with my views.
I am Hunter Boss. He just wanted to go to the distance by the looks of it, but he couldn't even do that.
And this is the MMA Island Podcast.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the MMA Island Podcast. I am Jack Kennedy alongside the great Keelan McNamara, and we're here to bring you the latest MMA. So let's get started ahead. Kevin Holland announced that he will be moving down to 170 pounds with the welterweight division, which is pretty surprising if we have to say so. So Keelan, what do you think about this move and some opponents he could potentially face?
Yeah, Jack, this is very surprising. We were talking about this just before we came on air. I only found out about this today, so I got him at this. This is very, very surprising news. Look, this is good and bad for Kevin Holland, and I'll break each of those down quite quickly now. It's good for Kevin Holland because obviously he has the physique to be able to bounce up and down between those divisions, and that's very good for him. A lot of fighters either murder themselves to get to 170, or they're too big to go up to, or they're too small when going up to 185. So obviously with Kevin Holland's frame, that's not an issue, and that's a big plus for him because if he's losing momentum in one division, he can bounce up and down between the two. He's not like Darren Till, who the door is kind of shut on at 170 because he's going to kill himself to make the weight. Now, whilst that's a good thing, there are a lot of negatives to this for Kevin Holland, and the biggest negative is probably the most obvious one. Going down to 170 is all well and good, but it doesn't deter from the weaknesses that are still in his game. We know that the gaping hole in Kevin Holland's fight game is his groundwork and his wrestling, and going down a division isn't going to change that. There's still killers when it comes to wrestling and jiu-jitsu at welterweight. Just because you're escaping them at middleweight, it doesn't mean that's going to change at 170. If anything, it can get worse because fighters at 170 are smaller, so they're faster down there. They'll be able to get into the clinch quicker against you and get you down quicker. I don't know if that changes your ability to get off your back easier or not. So I really think this is something that Kevin Holland needs to consider because with the greatest of respect, and I love Kevin Holland, me, you, and Hunter are all big fans of Kevin Holland. Even in his last fight against Kyle Dawkins, he still really, really struggled with the grappling game and the ground game. And that's what needs to improve. I mean, his weight's not an issue. Going down to 170 isn't going to fix that issue. The issue is fixing his wrestling, not going down to welterweight. So for his sake, I hope it works out, and I'd love to see him get success at welterweight. I'm just not sure if he will.
Yeah, hey, that's a really good point. I'm not fully against it, but for a lot of the reasons that you said, I'm just kind of like, it's something that's happening. Kevin Holland, I think he does have the body type that could go down to 170 because he is a middleweight that is not built like a middleweight per se. He's tall, but he doesn't carry much weight on him. The real reason he fights at 185 is just because of his height, and he's tall for the weight class, which is crazy to see.
A bit like Adesanya.
Exactly. So it's going to be wild seeing him at 170 because he's going to have such a height and reach and length advantage over all of his opponents at 170. And quite frankly, I think the power advantage will still be there as well at 170. But you nailed it. It's the wrestling. And honestly, he did look improved in that Dawkins fight. He didn't actually get physically taken down until the headbutt. And that was when the submission happened. But it's like he knew what to do, but he was awkward doing it, which just comes from a lack of experience in defending the takedown, which I think will come eventually. But he did look better and improved. But like you said, the different body weight, having to drain himself so much to get to 170, which I think that is going to be a real weight cut. If he walks around at maybe like 190 to get down to 185, he's going to have to walk around at least at 180 on a regular and then cut to 170. So that is a tough weight cut, and that will be physically demanding on him. Plus, you in that welterweight division, that is a murderer's row, and there are some elite wrestlers. I would say, argue probably out of any division in the UFC, welterweight is the most wrestler-heavy division in the UFC. So that is such a tough division to go down to. Yes, you have the height and reach and length advantage, and probably the power advantage too. But the problem is you're going to be facing some of the most technically sound wrestlers out there And that's gonna be very tough for Kevin Holland. I really do imagine. So I think you nailed that point. Um, as far as potential opponents go, I really don't know. I don't know if giving him a ranked opponent right away would be fair. Um, but just because I'm going to say, I think a fun matchup. Now, I'm not saying they should do this right off the bat. In fact, I would probably be upset if they did. But I'd like to see Neil Magny against Kevin Holland. I think that would be a really interesting matchup. Neil Magny is very solid all around, especially in the wrestling. And it'll be a great test for Kevin Holland to go test out his striking. Can he be a real welterweight against a welterweight contender? Um, Now, I think that fight should happen after at least one win from Kevin Holland against an unranked opponent, or maybe a very low ranked welterweight. But the options are there for Kevin Holland. I guess I do like him trying to revive his career a little bit, but I'm not sure 170 is the way to do it. I don't know.
Yeah, Jack, to be honest with you, there's very little room for me to create a counter argument here because I agree with pretty much everything that you're saying, and I'm not seeing the loops there to argue it. The first point that you mentioned about his actual physique, I think is a great point that needs to be considered by a lot of people. Kevin Holland is a tall middleweight. This is absolutely true, but he's a skinny middleweight,
Yeah.
which means he doesn't have a lot of mass or a lot of muscle to cut to get to 170. That means that his cut to welterweight is going to be very taxing on his body because you're absolutely correct. Kevin Holland likely walks at around 190 and has the easiest weight cut out of any real middleweight. So to get to welterweight, he's going to have to cut 15 pounds or so of pure muscle from his frame alone. And that's going to be a murderous task on its own right. And that's before we even get to 170. And then we look at the division itself. Like you said, perfectly worded murderer's row, death row of wrestlers, the very thing that he's trying to avoid by going down. So realistically, the problem with Kevin Holland here is that he can't hide from the thing he needs to fix. This isn't like middleweight, which is a more striker heavy division per se, or even light heavyweight, which is more strikers in it. I would make that argument. This is probably the most top heavy division of wrestlers that's in any division in the UFC right now. So he's really got to think this through, and he's got to be very careful with how he goes about this, because if he goes on a losing run at welterweight as well, then he could really find himself in a Kelvin Gastelum type situation where he's just stuck in the mud everywhere, and that would be a nightmare for Kevin Holland. Not to mention, because he's now a big name, he's got at some point he's gonna have to fight someone like a Khamzat Chimaev, and he's gonna get ragdolled of his game in there. So like I said, I hope it works out because I like Kevin Holland. Beneath the brash character and the arrogance, I think there's a lot of raw talent there. But he's really got to go, and he's really got to go about it the right way, or he will end up backstalling his career before it fully gets going.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, for sure. And that's if he gets to fight a guy like Chimaev, because Chimaev's
Yeah.
earned that spot. They're talking about him fighting Gilbert Burns next, which is insane. Kevin Holland has to work his way up, which is the toughest division, arguably the toughest division to work your way up in is 170. So yeah, hey, I like the attempt. We'll see what happens with Kevin Holland, one of our favorite fighters out there. We'll see what happens. Let's move on to the best of the best. And today we're talking about the best fighter who lost and never recovered in their career. Fascinating topic. Keelan, I'm very intrigued to see what you're going to have to say.
Oh, Jack, there are a few that we can go into, and I'm sure we'll end up touching on all of these guys anyway. There's one that immediately came to my mind, and this will be my pick, but there's one or two honorary mentions I'd like to go through first, just to sort of get the lay of the land on this topic. The first that came to my mind was Johnny Hendricks. Lost to George St. Pierre and just was never right afterwards. His career kind of fell apart really quickly, actually. He obviously had those PED issues, went up to middleweight and just could not get his career going again. Ended up falling out, ended up going on a losing run. And it was sad to see because, issues aside, Johnny Hendricks was a brilliant fighter. And in my opinion, he should have beaten George St. Pierre that night. I think that decision was wrong. I think that was pretty clear for anyone to see who knows how to score a fight. So Johnny Hendricks is definitely up there. The next honorable mention has to be Chuck Liddell. And this is really hard to mention because Chuck's one of my favorite fighters of all time. I'm not even going to go into the very end of his career because it's just too sad and heartbreaking to go into. So I'm not going to touch on that. Really, you look at around 2007 when he tried to avenge his loss to Rampage. That went downhill. Everything else went downhill after that. And it was a sad sight. It really, really was. But my pick, quite ironically, is my favorite fighter of all time, and that's Anderson Silva. I think you probably had a feeling this is where I was going with this. This is really sad as well. Anderson Silva defends his title against Chris Weidman, gets knocked out, admittedly deservedly for being arrogant, leaves his chin out, gets clocked, knocked out. Second fight, one of the most horrible injuries I've ever seen in my life. Gets his leg completely snapped. No one deserves to go out that way. Just a terrible situation all around. And then one of the most shocking statistics that I've ever seen in my life as a mixed martial arts fan. Ever since those Weidman fights, Anderson Silva went 1-8 in his remaining UFC fights or his mixed martial arts career fights. I mean, what more can you say on top of that? 1-8. And the one win that he got, I think, against Nick Diaz in 2015 was eventually overturned anyway because of the PED scandal as well.
He got a win against Derek Brunson, but there wasn't a good.
That's right. You're right. Yes,
that was a questionable decision, anyways.
Yeah, which was highly questionable on its own merits. So unfortunately, there's many that we could pick from, but for me, I think it's probably got to be Anderson Silva just because of what he was.
Yeah, I really like those picks. This is such an interesting discussion to talk about. And honestly, I kind of wanted to make this a little bit selfishly to talk about Johnny Hendricks a little bit. I don't know why, but I was just like, I was thinking about Johnny Hendricks. I was watching highlights and I was like, let's do a little a topic on him. So I'm glad you brought him up because I think he's one that you absolutely have to bring up. However, I don't think it was the GSP fight that got him. I think it was the fight following. And I think it was actually a win whenever he beat Robbie Lawler the first time. I think it was in that fight because beforehand, and even in the GSP fight, he was walking through everybody, like knocking people out in 15 seconds good was Johnny Hendricks. Then he faced GSP and technically lost that fight. However, that fight was dominated by Johnny Hendricks if you actually watch it. Like, it really was not a close. I had it 4-1 Johnny Hendricks going into the decision. It was really not a close fight. Exactly. It was really not a close fight. So he really dominated that fight too. However, he faces this guy named Robbie Lawler, who was in the UFC back in like the UFC like 40 and is making a career resurgence. It should be an easy win, an easy way to get a vacant UFC title. Robbie Lawler goes out there and puts on a phenomenal fight. Johnny Hendricks kind of was shocked a little bit, goes to the decision, and Johnny Hendricks rightly won the decision. However, he realized that he was a little bit shaky. Then the second fight came, and Johnny Hendricks really looked different. He looked out of it, and Robbie Lawler won, became champion. We know the story of Robbie Lawler, one of the best, I will say, the best career resurgence in UFC history. Unbelievable. And went on to defend the title 3 times. Johnny Hendricks, after that fight, the PED things came in, and you could just tell the way his body looked. It's like whenever they got Diego Sanchez, I think, for that. It's just, and Vitor Belfort, just the bodies after one fight looked totally different. His next fight after that, the fight that was to get him, he took like a year, or the suspension, I think it was like 2 years maybe. His fight to come back after that was against Stephen Thompson, and which, honestly, a lot of people were thinking, okay, Johnny Hendricks' first fight back, he probably will beat Stephen Thompson because of the wrestling. Stephen Thompson spinning hook kicks him and knocks him out, and that was it. Then Johnny Hendricks, he also missed weight for that fight, which is another thing. After he stopped taking the performance-enhancing drugs, he couldn't make weight ever. Then he goes back up to 185. Well, he goes up to 185, which is crazy because he should never have been at 185, but he can't make weight at 170 anymore without the performance-enhancing drugs. So he goes up to 185 and misses weight at 185. Do you remember that? Like, he went up a division and missed weight. How? Then fights Paul, and the story from there. He basically never won again. So I think he is one of the biggest wasted talents in the UFC's history, because I thought, especially after that GSP fight, that guy was going to be champion at 170 for a very long time. And I really think he could have been. with the skill set that he had, the fight IQ that he had, I really think he could have been. So it is a shame, but he reached the top, then lost to GSP and then beat Robbie Lawler. Well, I'd say after the loss to Robbie Lawler, and that was kind of it. And then he never really recovered after that. Now, believe it or not, I just talked about Johnny Hendricks for a while. I don't know why. I just wanted to. My number one is actually, and I'm a little bit surprised you didn't bring this one up, but it's another Brazilian champion who was extremely dominant for a very long time, Renan Barão at 135.
Oh, yeah.
So he was the interim champion, defended like 6 times as the interim
Like 4
champion.
years.
Which is ridiculous looking back on it, right? He was only champion for one title defense, technically. They only gave him the belt for one title defense, which is ridiculous. Then he lost to TJ Dillashaw and never, literally never, like that. The definition of what this question is Renan Barão, a guy that should be, and I think will eventually be in the UFC Hall of Fame for everything that he did, lost one fight. And then just, it's the same thing I feel like for Anderson Silva. After defending your title so many times and being on top for so long, there's something that clicks. And I think Anderson Silva's, especially the injury, had a big impact on it. But I think Renan Barão, just mentally, it was just a big switch, because just like that, TJ Dillashaw shocked the world, and then everything switched. Now Renan Barão is like, okay, back to the drawing board. Well, he hasn't been to the drawing board in 10 years. So
If ever.
exactly, he came in and started dominating. So where do you go from there? And then he just never really looked in the fight. He had some like I don't think he had weight issues, but just getting in, just he didn't look in fight shape. He was making weight but didn't look in fight shape. He just looked like he was trying to change too much, and it didn't get any results out of it. And I don't think he won a UFC fight since that loss to TJ Dillashaw, which is a shame because we all loved Renan Barão. But yeah, that's a fascinating topic, and those are some great fighters we picked right there, which just shows you how quickly things can change in this sport. You can be on top for so long, and then just like that, it's done.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great topic to bring up. It's one I'm really happy that we covered, actually, because I don't think it's one that actually gets covered enough. When you look at the roster of talent who just fell down, and one other one that I'll mention, and I'm actually quite surprised neither of us mentioned him, Tyron Woodley.
Yeah, hey, that's a phenomenal pick as well. Yeah,
and that's probably the most recent example as well of how quickly things can change.
Yep, 100%. He lost to Kamaru Usman, and then I'd almost compare that more to Renan Barão than anybody else. Just the mental aspect of it, because he lost and then just like wouldn't throw a punch the rest of the stuff. That's a great pick. Yeah.
The thing that makes that really interesting, and it's such a fascinating point you just brought up with Renan Barão, especially, I think there is absolutely a point, like you just said, where you hold the title for so long that you almost think you can't be hurt, and that you almost have that untouchable edge over your opponents before you even get in the octagon. And the second that's ripped away from you, it's almost like you lose a part of your soul with that. I think that's what happened with Tyron Woodley, because he was never the same again after that. Renan Barão is a great example. He lost to Dillashaw, and he wasn't the same human being after that. Anderson Silva, I think, was exactly the same. I would actually make the argument, even though he won the second fight, I would actually make the argument that Silva's downfall perhaps began after the first Chael Sonnen fight.
Oh, yeah, I like that.
Because that was the first time we ever saw Anderson Silva almost exposed as being human. Because he got beat up for 5 rounds and managed to pull off the only lucky triangle I've ever seen in my life. So I think you've actually hit the nail on the head there, Jack. I think it's the psychological factor, and when it goes, that's what leads to the downfall. I just don't think these fighters, after being on top for so long, know how quite to get that back again. And then I just don't think they can ever be the same again.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. I mean, Silva, I think, kind of lost some of his flair and his flashiness after that Chris Weidman loss, and especially the injury. Renan Barão, after he lost, would just go blitz mode every 3 seconds and then get caught and dropped. Then Tyron Woodley's the complete opposite of that. Tyron Woodley wouldn't throw anything. He would just sit back because he didn't know how. He fought like he fought as a champion, but as a challenger, which you can't win in fights like that. Fascinating, just the psychological aspect of it. Yeah, very interesting topic there for sure. Well, we have a fight night. Let's move on to the pick of the night, brought to you by MyBookie Sportsbook. Bet through them. Use our promo code MMA Island. Get started today. So let's go ahead and talk about Misha Tate versus Caitlin Vieira, and what our pick is for that main event and our bet of the night. Caitlin, start with you. What do you think?
Yeah, I've seen a lot of people saying that this is a very disappointing main event after the sort of fire month that we've had of cards. I'm not
Unbelievable.
even gonna, I'm not even going to go through them all because I think my head might actually explode thinking about it again. But I actually think this is a really good main event. Misha Tate, it's really cool to see her on the comeback trail, and she's up against a very decent opponent in Caitlin Vieira as well. Now, perhaps to the surprise of very few people, I actually think Misha Tate is going to win this.
Ooh.
I think she's going to come back to 2-0 since her return, and I think she's going to continue her charge towards the upper echelon of the women's bantamweight division. Now, I have to admit, this is not going to be an easy fight for Misha Tate. I don't think anybody would say otherwise. But I think she's got the skills to get this done. I can see her taking a decision or a late stoppage here. I don't think this is going to be an early affair. Caitlin Vieira, we know, is a very tough fighter. And I think it's going to take Misha Tate a couple of rounds to try and figure out that puzzle and break her down a bit. But I think once she does, she'll hit her stride, she'll hit cruise control, and then I think it's Misha Tate from then on.
Yeah, I really like that pick. And it makes sense, but I don't know. I got this feeling, man. I'm gonna go the opposite of you. I got Caitlin Vieira here. Uh, I think she is just going to be. I don't really know why. I think her stand up is just gonna be so much more crisp than Misha Tate. Misha Tate looked phenomenal in her comeback fight, but this is a 5-round main event, second fight after being retired for a very long time. All of the pressure is on Misha Tate here because everyone's looking at her. She's the one that is selling this main event. I think Caitlin Vera. I think she slips in here, and I think her striking is gonna be too crisp for Misha Tate. I think Misha Tate might get a little reckless in there at some times, or not reckless enough. And I think it might be one of those fights where Misha Tate thinks she's doing a little bit of enough, but the fight just slips away from her as it goes on. And I think this Vieira's time to shine. I think it's this main event right here, and I think she capitalizes on it. I think Caitlin Vieira gets the decision win over Misha Tate, and kind of spoils the comeback party a little bit. But yeah, so for my bet of the night though, I'm gonna go to and mainly just to talk about this fight, right? Is Michael Chiesa versus Sean Brady, and I think Michael Chiesa gets it done. He lost his last fight to Vicente Luque in a fight that he was actually winning. He just got sloppy on the ground. Didn't think anyone would go for a submission attempt against him. I don't think Sean Brady can submit Michael Chiesa. Chiesa gets to the ground, gets the W submission. That is my bet of the night.
Yeah, I like that a lot. I think Michael Chiesa, obviously a really, really strong fighter historically, and it's very possible to see him on the comeback trail this weekend for sure. Yeah, I like that a lot. And I'm actually going to go to my bet of the night now as well. Unfortunately, our spiritual betting Lord and Savior Hunter couldn't be with us this episode, but I'm going to make my own luck.
And we were both
point.
right the last one. The Max Holloway fight card, we were both right. So Keelan, we were a team for that. We got one.
Bro, Team JK are 1-for-1. You can't stop us.
That's right. That's right.
We're already on the way to the strap. You can't do nothing about it.
Yeah.
No, I'm actually going to head to bantamweight for my pick, and I'm picking Adrian Yanez to get the job done over Davy Grant.
That's a good one.
Yeah. And the reason why this is so good is because I'm actually looking right now at my bookie. Make sure to deposit with my bookie. Best odds anywhere, by the way. I'm actually looking at my bookie's live odds, and they have Davy Grant as the favorite at -170 and Adrian Yanez at +140 total. I think really smart money goes on Adrian Yanez for this fight. His fight against Randy Costa showed his skill, showed that he is one of the most skillful up-and-coming bantamweights in the division right now. His kickboxing is on another level. His boxing is smooth. His movement is impeccable. I think Adrian Yanez gets a second-round knockout here. And if you're looking for some smart money, I'm putting it on Adrian Yanez this weekend. That's my pick, Adrian Yanez for the win.
I love that. I forgot that fight was on this card too. Yeah. Yanez is one of my favorite.
People are going to forget that.
Yeah, Yanez is really one of my favorite fighters, up and coming fighters, and I think he's got a great potential. Yeah, that's a great pick and a great podcast by you and me, Keelan. Let's go. Thank you, everyone, so much for listening. As always, make sure to like and subscribe on YouTube. Make sure to follow us on Instagram at MMA.island and check out our website, MMAisland.net. As always, listen to us everywhere, literally everywhere, including iTunes and Spotify. Thank you again, everyone, so much for listening. Great podcast, Gillen.
Amazing podcast, Jack. And thank you once again, everyone, for listening.